Stefon Diggs, Josh Allen competing against each other in week 5. We're getting you ready for Bills Texans today on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bills and Locked On Texans. And as always, thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we'd, of course, love to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by John Hickman, the outstanding host of Locked On Texans, here to get you ready for a big one. Bills, Texans, both teams 3-1. The party's in Houston in week 5. John, welcome in.
Man, I can't wait to talk with you, Joe. I think this is going to be one of the games where both teams look back at the end of the year and say, man, we're glad we won that game. To put that past X, the whole 9, put it behind us, because whoever wins this game is going to have bragging rights. Josh Allen, Stefon Diggs. But right now I want to ask you about the top storylines for the Buffalo Bills. No Von Miller. He's been suspended. The linebacker room right now for the Buffalo Bills, questionable in terms of talent and production. So what's the top storylines for the Bills?
Well, I thought we'd get into this week talking all about Stefon Diggs and his game against Buffalo, but Von Miller and the suspension came through earlier this week, where he's going to be suspended for the next 4 games, which of course includes Sunday afternoon against the Houston Texans. And Von Miller tore his ACL in 2022, and that impacted him in 2023. It was kind of a lost season, very slow to come back. And this year he's been very good through the first 4 games of the season, 3 sacks in the first 4 games of the year, a lot of pressure, and the Bills using him situationally as a pass rusher, and he's been effective in doing so. And so the Bills will be without that component of their defensive operation. And so it's their first game without him, and that's going to put more on the likes of Greg Rousseau and A.J. Epinesa, who are the starters, but in a defensive line that rotates a lot. You're going to see more Casey Toohill. You're going to see more Dwayne Smoot, the rookie Javon Solomon out of Troy. Those guys are going to have to step up and help fill that void left behind by Von Miller. John, you mentioned the linebackers. The Bills have had to use depth at linebacker. Matt Milano, the star linebacker they have, he's got a torn bicep deal. He's going to be out until December. And then Terrel Bernard, the Bills' it'll be his 3rd year on the team, 2nd year as a starter, team captain, was really emerged as a playmaker last year. He's maybe going to play, kind of ramping up end of last week, practicing some this week. And I think there's some momentum for him to play. But if not, it'll be Balen Spector again. So that'll be something to definitely pay attention to. Do the Bills get Terrel Bernard back? Do they get Taron Johnson back? And how do they play defense without Von Miller?
So another question that I wanted to lean into. How are you guys right now with Joe Brady? Right? Joe Brady came in second half of last season, and so far, the Buffalo Bills, we can say you have beat up on bad teams, right? The Jags put up 47 on the Jags. Arizona Cardinals, not necessarily one of the elite teams, an average team, went up against the Baltimore Ravens and didn't necessarily have the offensive explosion that they did the week prior. But how has the relationship been with, Josh Allen and Joe Brady, and what has allowed that relationship to thrive?
Yeah, I think that relationship's pretty strong. I mean, it was Josh Allen's preferred choice to be the new offensive coordinator, and they gained a lot of momentum down the stretch last year. The Bills went on a run, wound up winning the AFC East again, the number 2 seed in the conference. And a lot of that was because of inserting Joe Brady in as the offensive coordinator and how the offense changed and became more multifaceted with the run game and more reliant on different type of offensive structure in the passing game to get more yards after the catch and be more efficient with how they distributed the football. And that has carried over into this season. Obviously, they've scored the 2nd most points in the NFL this year. Their EPA is outstanding. I know you mentioned the competition level. I don't know if that's a really relevant thing to bring up with a team like the Buffalo Bills, who has been as good as they've been since 2020, over the last several years. I mean, I think those are questions you might reserve for teams like the Miami Dolphins or the Dallas Cowboys, teams that haven't quite proven themselves against top competition. The Bills absolutely have. So if you want to look at the teams the Bills have beat and to try to diminish what they are, I think the greater sample size of the last 5 years tells you that the Bills are one of the upper echelon teams in the National Football League.
What's something that we need to know about the Buffalo Bills that can kind of concern Texans fans heading into Sunday's matchup, for them to sit back and say, okay, well, if they click in this area, the Texans will be in trouble?
Well, I think first of all, they got a heck of a quarterback in Josh Allen, one of the league's best, probably the second best player in the entire NFL. That guy's a problem. I would probably be concerned about him if I was a Texans fan. And certainly,
No doubt.
There's some emotional drama here, right? I mean, I'm surely Houston's going to come into this game and wanting to feed Stefon Diggs and, showcase him in this game. And I'm sure Josh Allen and the Bills are going to want to showcase the amount of scoring that they can do without Stefon Diggs, right? I think that's something to be extremely mindful of. And so you have a very motivated Josh Allen coming off of a loss. And Josh Allen, 14-4 coming off of a loss since 2020. That's the second best mark in the entire NFL in terms of win percentage. And so you have a Bills team that it didn't go the way they wanted to against Baltimore. And they have a great history of bouncing back, and certainly a lot of motivation for getting this one and not, stacking back-to-back losses, something that the Bills have been very successful at doing so, not only under Josh Allen, but even going back to Sean McDermott taking over as the head coach in 2017. The Bills had the second best win percentage in the NFL coming off of a loss. And so I'd expect a pretty spirited effort, and I'm sure that's true on both sides of the equation. Obviously, Houston got dismantled by the Minnesota Vikings in week 3, 34-7 loss. They bounced back. They got a squeaker. They got by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Of course, the team that Bills were able to beat by, 3 scores. And so you know how it goes, man. It's a week-to-week league, and
Right.
you know that the Buffalo Bills are going to come in with a lot of energy, as I'm sure the Houston Texans will as well.
Last question, Joe, before we talk Texans top storylines. Joe, do they miss Stefon Diggs?
Listen, here's the thing, man. I'm not going to sit here and talk bad about Stefon Diggs. He had the best 4-year stretch of receiver production in the history of the Buffalo Bills. Better than anything Andre Reed ever did, anything that Lee Evans or Stevie Johnson or Eric Moulds. He was phenomenal, and he was part of some amazing Bills football teams. They won the AFC East every single year. They won at least one playoff game every single year with Stefon Diggs. He's a great football player. And I think it's unfortunate that it ended the way that it did. And, Stefon Diggs has kind of made it known that he wanted to leave Buffalo, and Buffalo obliged. And that's obviously very costly for the Bills, who are eating over $30 million in dead cap space for him to not be on the team. Now, it's nice to get the second-round pick back in exchange for him, but Stefon Diggs is a great football player. Have the Bills missed him? I mean, the reality is they kind of transitioned away from Stefon Diggs last year over the last 12 games.
Yes.
And I am not trying to slight Stefon Diggs, but over the last 12 games last year, Khalil Shakir outproduced Stefon Diggs on 60 less targets. Like that, it wasn't working. They needed a switch. And so I think it's good for Stefon Diggs and the remainder of his career to be elsewhere. And I think the Bills and their everybody eats mentality on offense has unlocked another level of play for Josh Allen, where he's got the best EPA he's had in his career so far, the first 4 games of this season without Stefon Diggs. And look, I'm not going to sit here and talk bad about Stefon Diggs. I think he's a great football player, but I think both parties are where they want to be. And I wish Stefon Diggs nothing but great success moving forward, and tons of great memories for the player that he was in Buffalo, and so fun to have that type of production on your team on a weekly basis.
He was a Buffalo Bill. Now he's a Houston Texan, and that's a part of the top storylines for the Texans. So when we come back, guys, we got more Locked On podcast crossover for this Thursday. Locked On Bills, Locked On Texans. You're not going to want to miss it.
Purchasing tickets can be stressful, folks. You want to get to some of these games across the country. Well, it doesn't have to be stressful if you got the Gametime app. Gametime is the fast and easy way to purchase tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. I love the app. It's awesome. It's easy to navigate. They give you flash deals. They give you a picture from your seat so you know exactly what to expect when you get to the venue. They send the tickets straight to your phone so you don't have to dig through emails to find them. And, John, my favorite thing, last-minute ticket specials, man. I don't always know.
Yeah.
All these events, I don't know if in 3 months I can go to a concert. I can use the Gametime app and get great deals on that concert right up until the day of the event. So check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, folks, welcome back in. Locked On Bills, Locked On Texans, crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We talked all about the Bills in the first segment. I want to talk all about the Houston Texans here in the second segment, John. And I think the story of the Houston Texans is their sensational second-year quarterback, C.J. Stroud, and he's got a bunch of good wide receivers. And of course, Stefon Diggs is a leading talking point here, but Nico Collins might be the best receiver in the league right now. Tank Dell is a heck of a player. So talk to us about this Houston passing offense and how it's looked in year two under C.J. Stroud with, of course, the addition of Stefon Diggs.
You know, right now they're having their issues, right? And I think whenever you add, make those additions like a Stefon Diggs, bring back players like a Dalton Schultz. Tank Dell didn't get a chance to finish out his rookie year, also had the scare back at home in Florida with the shooting. So I think right now this offense, additions with Joe Mixon, who we got to talk about that, of course. I think right now this offense is still trying to find its own identity and its own identity separate from the Shanahan tree, right? Because that's the hot topic around the NFL. If you get a Shanahan tree coach, then you have an offense that can be able to put up points. Well, aside from week one, when they were able to put up 29 points, season high for the Houston Texans to this point, against the Indianapolis Colts, under 20 in back-to-back games, only 7 points against the Minnesota Vikings. And then this past week, they were able to kind of get things going. So I think right now, offensively, it is a struggle to find that rhythm, right? And I had an opportunity to ask C.J. Stroud about playing with a more, up-tempo, and he understands how that can help an offense put the pressure on defenses, whether it's getting to the line quickly, whether it's snapping the ball, in a certain amount of time, whether that is just kind of getting the ball out quicker, that can put pressure on defenses. And I think this offense is trying to find a way to, quote unquote, we can steal the Bills mentality, everybody eats. They're trying to find a way to get it done. And I think that it's a work in progress to this point, because not only is CJ Stroud going into his second year, but so is Bobby Slug as an offensive play caller. So they're having some miscues, and I think that this Buffalo Bills game will be a great opportunity to kind of get over, the hump of how can this offense find rhythm and click on all cylinders. Now, a large part of that, Bills fans, Joe Marino, they haven't had Joe Mixon for the past 2 games, and he has been a very good player for the Houston Texans through 2 weeks, didn't play the last 2. Whenever they can get the ground game going, that allows this offense to open up.
Well, John, it's interesting you mentioned kind of the passing game trying to find its way. They're 8th in EPA per pass play in the NFL, and so if that's struggling, it's not too bad. It sounds like the Houston Texans passing offense is going to be just fine. But I do want to ask you about this rushing offense. It's mostly been ineffective. 28th in the NFL in EPA per rush, despite a lot of investments in the offensive line. That's one thing that Houston's done. It's whether it's trading for players, drafting players high, they've invested a lot in this offensive line. And you would think with such a potent passing attack, especially with the Shanahan tree, that the rushing offense would be better. I know the big explosion week 1 against the Colts. I think we've since learned that the Colts can't stop anybody when it comes to the run defense. What's holding back this rushing offense from being better? Because it feels like from a scheme, from a running back, from an offensive line talent perspective, it should be good.
Well, Joe, James Cook is comfortable in y'all's system up there in Buffalo. He's also healthy. He's been able to play in all 4 games. And not saying you guys are the best run team in the NFL, right? But I think you guys right now are middle of the pack, average about 4.2 yards per carry, something along those lines. Am I right or wrong?
I think the Bills are in terms of rushing offense, the Bills, in terms of EPA, which I think is a great way to measure it, they're second best in the NFL at 0.14 EPA per rush.
So that's damn good. When I look at the Houston Texans' issues right now, week 1, they were able to have Joe Mixon for 4 quarters. Now, granted, that's against the Indianapolis Colts team. That defense can't stop a nosebleed. Week 2, they were able to have Joe Mixon for some part of the game, and he left that game injured. The following 2 weeks, no Joe Mixon. This offensive line is really predicated around being able to open up lanes for an experienced runner like Joe Mixon that knows when and how to hit the hole. Also, no RB2 for the Houston Texans, no Dameon Pierce. He's been out and he's missed the last couple of games. So right now, the Houston Texans are operating with Dare Ogunbowale, who had an amazing game for the Houston Texans this past Sunday versus the Jags in terms of being able to be a threat out of the backfield. And Cam Akers, who we know coming off 2 major injuries, 2 major surgeries, and doesn't have the pop that he used to have as a runner, right? Looked good in the preseason going up against 3s and 4s, but against starters, the margin for yards gets real small when everybody else is acclimated to your speed, if not faster. So they're not playing with their top guys. And also offensively, look at the offensive line. Juice Scruggs is playing center in the NFL for the first time. He was a rookie last year, had an up and down year, had some good moments. And so this year, he's also trying to establish himself. Also with Kenyon Green coming back, who missed all of his sophomore year. The ups and downs, I think, for the interior offensive line has a lot to do with communication. For exterior, for the 2 tackles, spearheaded and led by Laremy Tunsil, it's penalties. It's hard to kind of establish a run game when your penalty is pushing you to 1st and 15, 1st and 20. And so now you kind of got to throw your way out of being behind the sticks. A lot of those, issues with this offensive line, I think comes in between, comes from the inexperience of the 2 interior offensive linemen in the center and left guard, and the tackles, specifically Laremy Tunsil, not stepping up to the plate and being better than what he needs to be. Right, being the leader of this offensive line, cutting down those penalties, and setting the tone in terms of being able to engage and be aggressive with your defender. That's been an issue for the Houston Texans offensive line. They may touch you, but you're easily able to get around them to be able to make a play.
John, defensively for Houston, a fascinating offseason, a ton of personnel turnover, bringing in Fali Fadakase and Daniil Hunter and Tim Settle and Azeez Al-Shaair at linebacker and
Mario Edwards.
They drafted Bullock and Lassiter, both rookie starters in the secondary. There's a ton of turnover personnel-wise on this defense. How's it coming together? It's middle of the pack EPA, but what's your eyeballs tell you about this collection of talent and how it's performing?
They're trying to figure it out. They are trying to figure out. And for Houston, this is a year where a lot of people had big expectations for this team. And the reality is, like you mentioned, a lot of turnover on that side of the ball. And they're just trying to figure it out. It's hard to expect this team to be better defensively in the first quarter of the year when you do have 2 rookies starting, playing a lot of major roles. When you do not have Christian Harris out there, and you have to go out there with Henry To'oTo'o, who has filled into that role pretty well, but you're missing that piece. A name we didn't say, due to suspension, Danico Autry hasn't played football for the Houston Texans. And so you're looking at 2 vets that's not out there, 2 rookies that are out there, and this defensive team trying to be able to put it all together. So I think they're just trying to figure it out. Daniil Hunter has been quiet the last 7 quarters of football. Will Anderson, I think, needs to do more in terms of being able to get after the quarterback and create more pressure and disruption in the run game. But once they are able to get all of their guys back healthy, and Dylan Horton, who was just able to come back, he has a 21-day window to come back for the Houston Texans. Kurt Hinish is able to come back in 3 weeks. Once they get all of their guys, I do think we're going to see a different defense. And then also, by that time, the 2 rookies, they have more experience playing-wise, and the defensive coordinator, Matt Burke, and D'Amico Ryans, they'll be able to figure out what their strengths really are and find ways to put them in position to create turnovers and maximize their playing skills.
Last one here for you on Houston before we get to keys to victory in the final segment. Run defense looks like it's been problematic. I'm certainly not saying it hasn't been for Buffalo, but also an issue for Houston, who's coming in at 28th in EPA per rush. Is this just a matter of personnel, or like where has the run defense kind of let the team down? I know they've faced, of course, Indianapolis in week 1, but they've conceded a lot of rushing yards, 158 to Jacksonville last week.
Yeah, they're just figuring it out. I know I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I think against the Jags, they allowed a lot of yards, and Danielle Hunter specifically. They just ran right at Danielle Hunter, so they kind of neutralized him a little bit. And the Jags were able to take advantage of the Houston Texans on the edge of that defense, right? One of those plays you saw Derek Stingley come down, take a bad angle, and then now you're looking at Bigsby, where you maybe get a no gain, loss, tackle for loss, or maybe gain of one, turning that into 22, 23 yards. Uh, and so for Houston, they just got to be better in terms of angles and making plays defensively when their number is called. That's been something that D'Amico Ryans has been really harping on. They got to be able to make plays in the secondary. And it's not just all interceptions. It's when you're a secondary guy's got to come down and get a little dirty and make tackles around the line of scrimmage because, again, a no gain, a tackle for loss can potentially be a 22, 23-yard gain if you don't do your job right. They preach doing your job, stacking good moments. And for Houston, they've been very inconsistent in that area.
All right, folks. Coming up on the other side of it, we're breaking down the keys to victory for both sides of the equation. Be sure to stick with us. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by John Hickman, the host of Locked On Texans. We're here to break down the keys to victory for each team. One team's getting to 4-1, the other one's getting to 3-2. John, if the Texans are getting to 4-1, what are the keys to success on Sunday afternoon?
They are dominating offensively. I think the Bills are going to be able to put up points. I think they can, lead this game with at least 21, 24 points on the scoreboard. But for the Houston Texans, the inconsistencies offensively, this is not a team you can play around with. Josh Allen is not a quarterback that you can play around with. So offensively, you're going to have to do your part. Check this out. Against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jags broke off a 55-yard run, got to the 4-yard line, didn't score. Defensively, the Texans did their job. 3 drives, of no points allowed. That's a good day. That's a good moment. But the Texans offense, it took them to their last drive to score some points. And you can't do that with the Bills because Josh Allen and Joe Brady and those weapons and James Cook, they're going to find a way to put the ball in the end zone. So for Houston, when your defense is giving you those opportunities, they're getting that opposing offense off the field. You got to come in, you got to step up and score points. So I think this is going to be one of those games where if Houston doesn't score points like they should, and I mean at least 24 points, they're going to lose this game. Of course, we can count on Nico Collins, but for Stefon Diggs as a, not going home game, but the Bills are coming to Houston, he's going to have to perform well. Tank Dell will be coming back off of an injury he missed last week. He's going to have to be a part of this offensive explosion. And Bobby Sloak in his offensive game plan has to find a way to get Dalton Schultz involved. He has been a very good player for the Houston Texans, but through 4 weeks, he has been in a lot of ways forgettable. That can't happen Sunday. So I think the Texans offensively, they're going to have to run the ball, open up your playbook, take some of those shots down the field, but specifically attack the middle area of the Bills defense, find ways to get some yak yards and get the ball in the end zone.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to score. I think that's something we're going to agree on. I think you get 28 points. I think that's going to give you a chance to win the game. So I know you were saying 24, 21. I think this is probably a 1st to 28, in my opinion, in terms of who's going to win this football game. John, for me, in terms of the Bills winning this game, I've got 3 major keys to victory. And I'm not sure any one's more important than the other, but the first thing that I have written down is you better have the right plan for Nico Collins. This wide receiver is unbelievable. 100 more yards than any other player in the NFL this season, and he is a problem. Big, fast, physical, ball skills, body control, hands, wins at all levels of the field. He's a problem. I mean, and what's amazing about Nico Collins and watching Houston is for how much of a problem he is, but also how wide open he is. Everybody knows that they want to throw him the ball. People just can't slow this guy down because he's such a bully at the top of routes, and he's just a tremendous physical specimen. And I think the Bills are going to have their hands full with him, and I think he's the key cog in the wheel. I know there's other good players on that team, but I think it's about Nico Collins. And I think the Bills have good corners to match up. I think Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford are quality starters that I think they're big physical corners as well. So I think there's some good on good, but man, Nico Collins has been a problem. And with his ability to win on those in-breakers, that's going to put stress on the Bills and kind of how they like to space the field and, maybe attack the safeties where I think the Bills have, a little bit deficient with in terms of their starting caliber players on the back end there. So Nico Collins and having the right plan there, I think, is critical. Number two, we'll keep it on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's a big day for the Bills' interior defensive line, and I'm specifically talking about the guy that's loyal to the soil, Ed Oliver, right? The Houston guy, five-star recruit, could have went anywhere he wanted. He wanted to stay in Houston. And every time that he's been back to the state of Texas to play a football game, he's had a little something extra about him. I'm sure this will be a big opportunity for him. And I think, as you've articulated to this point, some concerns with the interior of that Houston Texans offensive line. Yeah, you mentioned Juice Scruggs, and I mean, even Kenyon Green, who I think has really been a problem at left guard this year. I think there should be some good matchups for Ed Oliver to be able to take advantage of in a year where Ed was tremendous last year. 9.5 sacks, big breakout season, quiet start to this year. I think that's got to change on Sunday afternoon against the Houston Texans. And the last thing for me is being two-dimensional on offense. I think that the Bills' offense is equipped to be able to throw it. It's equipped to be able to run it. And I think they need to present both of those things to Houston with a lot of consistency. I think you should be able to find some success running the ball against Houston. And if that's the case, that obviously sets up a lot for your passing game, softens up some of your looks in terms of coverage spacing. It really helps get the play action game going. And the Bills need to lean into that. And I think the world of Derek Stingley is one of the corners, but I think Kamari Lassiter is a young player. He's been vulnerable in terms of vertical separation. Yes. They got a young safety. Even if they get some of their other players back, Ward and those others, they're still working back, and I don't think they've been that good so far to start this season. So I think you've got to be two-dimensional on offense and really showcase the balance that you can bring to the table against the Houston Texans defense that has a lot of new players, and as you've already said, kind of still trying to figure it out.
I also want to add this for the Houston Texans. No Von Miller for this game. So that is a godsend for those two tackles who hasn't had what Titus Howard hasn't had the best start to this year. Laremy Tunsil has been good in terms of being able to protect the quarterback. The penalties have been an issue. So, we could talk about offense and defense, but they cannot start behind the sticks. That's probably number one. And D'Amico has been completely pissed about that. So controlling and maintaining penalties. They have been the most penalized team through 4 weeks, That has to change. But defensively, I saw the Buffalo Bills offensive line just have issues a little bit with the Baltimore Ravens. And they were able to get, 3 sacks on Josh Allen. So when you have a player like Josh Allen that can extend plays and at times trusts his arm more than maybe he should, right? Amazing arm talent. If you can get into his face and create that pressure, I think that gives any team a better chance to beat the Buffalo Bills. You cannot stay clean, of course. You never want that for Josh Allen offense. So getting into his face, forcing him out the pocket at times to create some of those errant throws and being able to limit the penalties. If you do that, I think Houston has an opportunity to win this game and getting the ball out quicker. Finding that rhythm to allow this offense to be able to, for one, extend drives, create drives, that rhythm, open up the playbook. And to do that, I think a lot of 3-step drop options to maybe 1st and 10 to 2nd and 4. But the run with that, especially if you can't run the ball, utilize those tight ends to allow the offense to have positive plays.
Yeah, I think pressure on Josh Allen and any quarterback is a good recipe to winning a football game. I will say, to add some important context to that Baltimore game, I thought the pressure in that game was far more game script related than anything. That game got away from Buffalo pretty quick. And as you know, I mean, when you can play defense with a 2-score lead, which Baltimore had for 75% of the game, you could really tee off and stress protection schemes. Going into that game, Josh Allen was the least sacked quarterback in the NFL. I think he was the least sacked quarterback in the NFL last season as well. So Josh Allen doesn't typically get sacked, but when you're up 2-3 scores on an opponent, you don't have to respect the run game. You can tee off and really get creative with your pressure packages. And I thought that was a big part of Baltimore's recipe on Sunday night. Certainly something that I'm sure Houston and other teams would try to replicate moving forward. So we'll find out. We'll play it, see what happens, John. It's going to be a big one. I'm sure that it'll be one of the marquee games across the NFL this week. Surprising that they snuck it in at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. I thought maybe this would be a primetime game.
Especially considering the storylines around
it. Plenty of storylines. All right, John and everybody, thanks for being here. Plenty more coverage coming your way, both on Locked On Bills and Locked On Texans. So make sure you stay tuned in for all your pre- and post-game coverage all year long. For John Hickman, I'm Joe Marino. Thanks for being here, everybody, and enjoy the game.